South Korea is about to disappear from the map. And this is not an exaggeration from the internet. It comes from serious projections that point to a strange future for one of the most modern countries in the world. If nothing changes, the population may shrink until it can no longer sustain itself. And the reason has nothing to do with war, climate, or the economy. The problem is the absolute lack of babies. Today, Bello Mundo will help you understand how work, culture, routine, and behavior have transformed South Korea into a real case of possible extinction over the next few generations. Number 1. History. In the 50s, Korea was a completely different country from the one you know today. It was a rural place marked by war, poor, and full of large families. Having many children was not a choice. It was a necessity. 5 or 6 children per woman did not attract anyone's attention, because at that time children meant strength to work, security for the future, and a guarantee that the house would remain standing. The more, the better. But the country was turned upside down when the famous Han River miracle began. Industrialization swallowed up rural villages, buildings began to rise, and that simpler life gave way to a fast pace that no one was used to. Money began to circulate, but with it came a new kind of pressure. The city became expensive, the routine became demanding, and the idea of prosperity took on a new face. It was at that moment that the government decided to act. Campaigns began to emerge, telling families to reduce the number of children they had. They said that a small family lived better, that planning was the way forward, and that the future would be easier if each couple had a maximum of 2 children. And the country bought into this vision. The birth rate, which had been extremely high, began to plummet. In the early 2000s, the rate was already around 1 child per woman. It wasn't ideal, but it didn't seem like the beginning of a collapse either. But Korea changed too quickly. The cost of living skyrocketed, the job market became a roller coaster of demands and stress, and motherhood became practically a luxury. The rate plummeted for good. Today, the country is at 0.72 children per woman. For a population to continue to exist, the number should be 2.1, and Korea is nowhere near that. It is by far the lowest level in the world, and there is no parallel to it in any rich country. The result is visible. Empty nurseries, daycare centers closing, entire neighborhoods aging. Even the pink seats on the subway, those reserved for pregnant women, are almost always empty. In a country of more than 50 million people, the number of annual births has fallen to around 200,000 children. Korea, which once feared having too many people, now faces a much more surreal fear. And you're about to find out why. Number 2. Cost of living and education. If fewer and fewer people are deciding to have children in South Korea today, the first answer lies in their pockets. Most of the population is concentrated in the metropolitan area, where the most promising jobs and the hustle and bustle of urban life are found. But living there has become an almost impossible challenge. Anyone who sees the photos on social media imagines a paradise of stylish coffee shops, colorful billboards, and impeccable subways. But what is modern is also expensive. The average price of apartments has skyrocketed in recent years, and the simple act of living there has become one of the most expensive investments on the planet. And when I say apartment, I don't mean a penthouse. It's a standard Korean box that would make many studio apartments seem spacious. To give you an idea, a young couple, even with a stable income, can take more than 15 years just to save up for the down payment on an average property. That's living with absurd discipline, giving up leisure, comfort, and any kind of extravagance. Buying a house has become such a distant dream that many no longer even consider this possibility. Now think about the next step. If you can barely afford a place to sleep, How do you factor a child into the equation? Having a child means spending more on everything: food, clothes, transportation, basic bills, and above all, education. And in Korea, education has become a national obsession. Children barely start walking, and they are already enrolled in tutoring. After regular classes, there are still hagwons, which are private courses that most parents consider mandatory. Math, English, music, martial arts, everything is paid for, everything is expensive. Not because they want to show off, but because they are afraid their children will fail in such a competitive system. Number 3. Working hours. If the cost of living is already scary, the Korean routine completes the package. Life in the country is like a marathon that starts in childhood and has no finish line. From an early age, children enter into a logic of permanent competition. School all day, tutoring in the afternoon, hagwon at night. And when there is a break, it is not for rest, but for study. When these teenagers become adults, the dynamic doesn't change. They just swap their backpacks for badges. The pressure continues, only now with goals, bosses, and corporate expectations that seem endless. The law may set a limit on weekly hours, but the culture does something else. Many people don't leave work until after 9 p.m. Those who try to leave early end up being frowned upon. And no one dares to get up from their chair before their boss. Excess has become routine. There are young people who go to the hospital on Sunday just to get an IV and be able to work on Monday. This has become part of the logic of survival, and many people still call it self-care. In this scenario, what is left? Those who can barely sleep will not have time to date or start a family. And in a country where virtually all babies are born within formal marriages, this equation does not add up. Without a relationship, there are no children. It's simple, but brutal. The truth is that it is impossible to maintain a healthy birth rate when there is a lack of time, money, and space. And in Korea, all three are disappearing at the same time. But for a specific group, this pressure weighs even more heavily. Because in addition to the general demands, they still face a social system that insists on putting everything on their shoulders. This is where the most deeply rooted piece of this puzzle comes in. Korean patriarchy still dictates the rules, and with it, the bill gets even higher. Number 4. The weight of patriarchy. In fiction, Korean men may seem like princes, kind, romantic, and sensitive, but off-screen, many women would say that the story is much less enchanting. Today, a huge proportion of South Korean women say they do not want to marry or have children, and the reasons are no mystery to anyone within the country. Domestic violence is still common, and machismo is alive and well in virtually all areas of life. Even with all its technological modernization, Korea has retained deep traces of Confucian society. Traditional roles remain stuck in the past, and this directly affects those who should be at the center of any birth policy: women. Women's education has advanced greatly. They are among the most educated populations on the planet. However, studying has not become synonymous with equality. South Korea still has the largest gender pay gap in the OECD. On average, women earn almost a third less than men, and in positions of power, the gap is even wider. Just under a fifth of parliament is female, and leadership positions remain dominated by men. This inequality also appears within the home. After work, most women take on practically all the invisible work alone. They take care of children, take care of the home, manage routines, and rarely share this burden. The burden is further increased by a taboo that the country has not overcome. Having a child out of wedlock is seen as a moral failing. Single mothers are discriminated against, lose their jobs, face prejudice in schools, and are often pressured to hide their pregnancy or give up their baby. For decades, the country sent thousands of children for international adoption because their mothers had no support. They were only blamed, and when a woman decides to pursue motherhood, she pays a high price. She loses promotions, loses space, loses professional momentum. The female employment rate falls, and the choice ends up becoming a cruel dilemma. Either women sacrifice their own careers or try to balance everything and collapse in the process. Increasingly, they prefer to preserve what they can still control. They continue to study, work, and live, but leave motherhood out of the equation. Number 5. Machismo in politics. And all this machismo doesn't stop at home or in the workplace. It rises to the political stage and takes over institutions. To give you an idea of the level of machismo, in 2023, a city councilman in the capital published a report on an official government website saying that women were partly responsible for the increase in tragedies involving men. It sounds like a joke, but it's not. According to him, South Korea has become a society dominated by women who steal men's jobs and leave men without girlfriends, which increases male depression. The guy basically argued that men are devastated because women exist. You think it's a joke, but it's there, recorded on the official government website before being deleted after the backlash. And when society exploded, with teachers, scholars, and even mental health organizations classifying the statement as dangerous, irresponsible, and misogynistic, he obviously tried to explain himself by saying he had been misunderstood. But the festival of surreal statements doesn't end there. In 2019, during the confirmation hearing of a candidate for judge, a Conservative Party congressman decided that her education, resume, and skills were not as important as her marital status. In the middle of the hearing, he looked at the candidate and said, "You are still single, and Korea's biggest problem is that women are not giving birth. You have an excellent resume, but please fulfill your duties to the nation." The woman was there to take on a legal position, but for him, the only resume that mattered was her uterus. Like his colleague, he apologized later, of course, but the statement became a symbol of institutional sexism. And then there is the most famous case of all. Former President Yoon Suk-yeol built much of his election campaign on the narrative that feminism hinders healthy relationships. He said that the decline in birth rates is because feminism prevents young people from dating, as if social justice were responsible for the end of marriage. He even had the audacity to claim that there is no gender inequality in South Korea, while the OECD's own report ranks the country among the worst in the world in terms of equality, with one of the largest gender pay gaps on the planet. So when we say that there is a war of narratives blaming women for everything, it is no exaggeration. It comes from city councilors, congressmen, and former presidents, and this shapes the minds of many people, including younger men, who have grown up believing that they are losing ground to women, when in fact, what exists is a country that has modernized its economy, but forgotten to modernize its mentality. This climate creates two things at the same time. On the one hand, women are increasingly tired, pressured, and discredited in the idea of marriage and motherhood. On the other hand, men are fragile, isolated, some without any social skills, and repeating resentful speeches that come from above. And it is from this toxic intersection that the next problem arises: the movements of men and women who have simply given up on social life. Number 6. Women's movement. After so many years of carrying the weight of a culture that demands a lot and gives little in return, some women have decided that they will no longer follow the imposed script. In recent protests, some have even held up signs saying that they are not baby-making machines, a direct rebuke to those who insist on placing the responsibility for the demographic crisis solely on their shoulders. And some went even further. A movement known as 4B emerged, which stands for 4 refusals. No dating, no marriage, no children, and no relationships with men. It seems extreme at first glance, but for those who live under constant pressure, this choice functions more as a defense than as rebellion. 4B was born out of exhaustion. Women work more, earn less, take care of the house almost alone, and face pressure to abandon their careers after motherhood. In addition, they still hear authorities saying that Korea's problem is the lack of babies, as if everything depended exclusively on their bodies. In such a hostile environment, many thought that the solution would be to no longer play the game. The movement is growing mainly among young people in their 20s and 30s who do not want to repeat the life they saw in previous families. They saw exhausted mothers, colleagues fired after becoming pregnant, and friends judged because they decided to marry later. And they looked at all this without seeing any advantage. They create communities among friends, travel alone, support women-led businesses, and refuse to enter into any dynamic that puts them back in the role of caregiver, nanny, housewife, and underutilized employee all at the same time. And this, of course, fuels another silent war, because while 4B acts as an escape valve for many women, it also fuels resentment among a portion of men, especially those who are already experiencing the crisis of isolation, lack of self-esteem, and frustration that we are going to talk about now. Number 7. Male isolation. While many women are moving away from a system that only overloads them, some men end up disappearing from it in another way. It is not a physical disappearance. It is social. Korea is currently experiencing a silent wave of male isolation, a phenomenon that combines pressure, fear, frustration, and loneliness. Being alone would already be a big problem, but in a country where there are almost no children born outside of marriage, it becomes a complete disaster. Almost half of Korean men between the ages of 25 and 49 have never married. Many want to date, want to get closer, want to build a life, but they can't. Surveys show a gap between male and female interest. A good portion of men would like to meet new women. On their side, interest drops by half, and more than 40% of women say they don't want any interaction with men at the moment. It's as if the country were divided into two paths that no longer meet. On one side, exhausted women, tired of the pressure. On the other, men who no longer know how to get closer without fear of appearing inadequate. And this didn't come out of nowhere. From an early age, they grow up hearing that they need to be strong, perfect, and tireless. Those who don't keep up with this pace feel like failures. From there, isolation is born. 5% of young people live in extreme seclusion, something similar to the Japanese hikikomori. They spend entire months at home, without studying, without working, without going out. They become young people disconnected from real life. This isolation also fuels resentment, especially among those who follow anti-feminist groups online. Not surprisingly, about a quarter of men in their 20s say they sympathize with this type of movement. The result is simple: less dating, less marriage, fewer babies, and an entire generation growing up alone. Number 8. Incentives. Over the past 15 years, Korea has spent fortunes trying to convince people to have children. There were aid packages, bonuses, prizes, postpartum support, and programs that left the rest of the world wondering if this was a solution or desperation. The curious thing is that nothing really worked. Private companies also joined the race. The most famous case is that of the Booyoung Group Construction Company, which became a topic of conversation around the world after announcing that it would pay the equivalent of $75,000 per baby to employees. And those who had 3 children could choose between $300 million, one, or free housing in a company apartment. In theory, it seemed motivating. In practice, it raised a question that no one could ignore. Who will take care of this child when the parents work until 8 at night? The government tried to follow the same path. Babies are already born with a guaranteed financial package for the first years of their lives. There is monthly assistance, postpartum support, layette bonuses, and even subsidies for egg freezing. It is the state saying that women should hurry before it is too late. But money does not solve the lack of time, lack of balance, or lack of a present father. It does not solve the stigma surrounding working mothers, nor does it correct working hours that crush any possibility of family life. Some cities decided that the problem was not a lack of babies, but a lack of couples. So they created programs that paid people to date, get engaged, and marry. It sounded like a reality show, but it was public policy. And when none of that worked, proposals to import people emerged. From foreign nannies with reduced salaries to incentives for rural men to marry women from neighboring countries. There was even a congressman suggesting exemption from military service for those who had 3 children before the age of 30. The truth is simple. Korea does not suffer from a lack of desire to have children. It suffers from a lack of conditions. As long as everything is expensive, exhausting, and unequal, no amount of financial incentives will fill nurseries. Did you know all this? Tell us in the comments. Thank you for joining us so far, and see you on our next adventure through this bello mundo of ours. See you next time.